Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Strife's Sanctum podcast. My name is Citizen Strife, and this week I'm going to be talking about The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening. And mostly I'm going to be focusing on the Switch version because I didn't play the Game Boy as a kid, and it's probably going to unnerve people, I'm guessing, given given my age and given whatnot, but I really didn't do whole handheld console things until the DS anyway. So when I'd heard that Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening was happening for the Switch, I was very, very happy, because much in the same vein as RPGs, I'm one of these people that's like, just release things on old platforms if you can. I said this after beating Final Fantasy IV. The more people in later generations get to experience some of the good old stuff, the better it is for everybody, because you get to kind of see the best of both worlds. You get to see the new functions and the new way that games are made with quality of life, but you get that old school mentality and that old school like tightness in design. Now, sometimes that can end up being very dated and stiff, but again, that's where the quality of life changes, mostly optional changes getting made, and design-wise. The thing with Link's Awakening, though, from mostly what I've seen, it's a 1-to-1, but they expanded the screen. I remember watching footage before playing it. The person playing the game on YouTube was like, the screen was so stuck, so small, because that's what the Game Boy had. It was a good game, but trying to get your bearings was a bit problematic because some of the room you just couldn't see. They widened it out by about 4 or 5 screens worth in the remake because they had the real estate for that, and it made for a much easier experience to digest. This is a game that you can kind of get done in like 5 to 6 hours, maybe a little less, maybe a little more. I find those last 2 dungeons to be problematic, and that was really my main concern with those games, because having not really played those dungeons, I was going in blind. You play a dungeon 1 or 2 times in any of the other games, you kind of know what you're in for, you can kind of zip through it and you're just done. I'm so done with the Zelda, the Link to the Past dungeons, that I'm just like, they're ingrained in me, I'm never going to fuck up. So it was a weird experience doing them again from the perspective of somebody who's never tried this, I saw them, but watching them on a YouTube thing and then actually playing it threw me for a loop too, because what is the minutia involved with the dungeons? What items do you need? And thankfully, in most cases, they went for the, hey, you get the item for the dungeon, and then it makes traversal a lot easier. But backstory being what it is, Link, from the Link to the Past version, is going off on a journey, and is on a raft and gets caught Adol style, shipwrecked somewhere known as Koholint Island. He gets nursed back to health by Marin and Terran, who I'm guessing are not related to Malon and Talon from the Lon Lon Ranch, but I'm guessing that's where they got their designs from. But they are in the Koholint Island. It's a nice, smallish area. It's big enough, I would say, and that's again where the scope of the game comes through. It has itself in sections. You have a village, you have a beach, you have forests, mountains, rivers, swamps. Traversal is just big enough. It is reminiscent of Link to the Past in all of the good ways. And I say this as a person who's not really into the 3D Zeldas, which is why I haven't really delved into them for this podcast reasons, because something about the way the game processes itself, not story-wise, but just the added dimension forces something in the design that makes it feel a lot longer than it usually is. Case in point, I play Ocarina of Time. I'm easily going to spend about 15 to 20 hours, or even 30 if I'm slow, versus a normal Zelda game, which could take 5 or 10. Same deal with any game that translates from 2D to 3D. There is something that you have to do. I'm not saying it's on rails. What I'm saying is it's more cognizant of what you're doing in a dungeon because you don't have as much real estate to cover. You don't have to constantly be looking for bats or some other bullshit because you're only looking at a 2D plane, and it's all given to you up front. And there's no platforming involved, so there's no... I mean, there is, but there also isn't. Because there is sometimes an issue with 3D where you have to platform and you fuck up. You have to climb your way back up, and you got to do that stuff. And there is still some of that in 2D, but hopefully this makes a little sense in the way that it's a faster, tighter sort of experience when you don't have the 3D. I'm not going to go all sequelitis and just complain about what 3D does mechanics-wise, but suffice it to say I'm on that side of things. We're saying it's easier to traverse. It's easier to understand what limitations there are when you have yourself put in a bit of a box. That's not to say that gameplay is better or worse. That's just a preference. And living my life basically via Link to the Past, it's kind of easy to see why a Link's Awakening game, while not perfect, would have been something more akin to my style. And having played it, it very much goes in the same vein. You're able to experience and experiment and try new things. And that sense of wonder is there, but it's not... How would I put it? The gameplay is divided in areas enough that you know, hey, I have to go to a certain dungeon to do a thing. There's no way around doing a thing. I have to go get this thing to do this thing. It's a lot more of a linear experience than even Link to the Past was. Because Link to the Past and Link's Awakening tried to do what the original Zelda really couldn't, which was linearity to a degree that it made sense, that you knew what you were trying to do. Mostly in the form of that stupid fucking owl from Ocarina of Time showing up in this game too. But less frustrating. But it keeps you understanding, oh, okay, but then you beat a dungeon and you're like, well, you go here because the game's telling you to go here. So you're still cognizant of where you gotta go, but if you've never played it before like I did, you're just kind of like, okay, I'm given enough rope to know where to go, and I see enough things that I can try some things and challenge myself, but I know, okay, I can't physically do a thing until I get an item like the flippers, like the hook shot, whatever, or get the frickin' rooster, underneath the thing. But getting that, you have to do the thing that I wasn't, sometimes you have to do something you weren't prepared for, because I went through pretty much the entire game without doing the trading sequence. And then I had to do the trading sequence. And I'm like, well, fuck, I guess I gotta do the fucking trading sequence. And then I gotta do the fucking music thing that I hadn't fucking done all game. Shit like that. But you don't have to do them in the same order. You could do them as they release, and you can get them as they happen, and it's fun. You can get Bow Wow and just keep Bow Wow forever, but then the game's telling you, no, we don't want you to have the killer chomp chomp pet that can kill anything in one chomp. Fucking man, why can't we have Bow Wow? But you have enough of everything that it works. You get your dungeons, and the interesting thing with the dungeons is they're laid out very blocky, very room heavy. This is the best way I would describe it. The rooms are all the same size usually, and they have checkpoints and mid bosses, and the bosses are easy. Usually, until I found out I couldn't somehow beat Ganon for some fucking reason, but that's my own problem. I know how to beat Ganon, and I looked it up, but I didn't know how to do it at the time. I was trying to stream it, so it frustrated me. He kept blocking it. That's what it was. He kept blocking it, and I couldn't use it. I couldn't use the freaking controller to run around him and shit. Whatever. It is what it is. But outside of Eagle Tower and Turtle Rock, I never once felt that the dungeons were so obtuse. And most of Eagle Tower was just doing if I remember right, Eagle Tower was the one with the balls. There, I said it, balls. Whichever one that was. I want to say it was the balls. It was the one with the balls. I'm done. Trying to figure out the mechanics of doing that is a lot of backtracking, a lot of weird finagling and stuff. And Turtle Rock was mostly go here. If you go here, you have to go back around and do a thing, because that was the weird problem I was facing with the final two, and it's specifically those two. Is a lot of issues in the dungeons were not solved by going back to where you were. Sometimes you were stuck in a certain spot and you had to go back to where you were and then rethink your steps and constantly be like, okay, I'm doing this again, I'm doing this again, I'm doing this again, trying to get back to square one rather than just, starting from scratch and always being able to just know where to go. So it's weird, because it was an experience that I hadn't had before, because even with Ocarina I can kind of gauge mostly what I'm still supposed to do. It felt awkward having to do dungeons by having to think. And thinking is not my strong suit. So I'm not dissuading anybody from playing Zelda just because I found the final two dungeons to be very obtuse and annoying and very backtrack heavy. That would be one of the main issues I had with it, was those final two dungeons. But getting to the dungeons, you also had to find keys. So that was annoying. Rather than just getting into a dungeon, you had to find a key to open the door to the dungeon. That was the other problem. Other than that, though, it's a breezy experience. The overworld, again, is cordoned off into kind of what you need. If you're in the swamp, you need Bow Wow to chomp things. If you have a bunch of holes in the ground, you need a hook shot, or you need Pegasus boots, which will be items given to you in the, a lot of the same familiar things you would get in Link to the Past, you get as dungeon items in this game. So it made for an experience that I kind of understood, rather than having to kind of think, what am I supposed to do? I'm given enough rope to hang myself, pardon the phrase, but I'm never not understanding what I'm trying to do. And there is that happy medium. Because if you're given too much freedom, then you don't know what the fuck you're doing. It's the original Zelda problem. You're just looking around for a thing, and some people prefer that. I really don't. I need some sort of direction. I play JRPGs. Give me direction. Don't force me to talk to 50 million NPCs for them to tell me what to do. Have somebody put a marker on there, or have a major NPC there to tell me what I have to do as part of the story. That way I kind of know, okay, I don't have to sit there and spend 50 million freaking dialogue spots doing that, or talking to people and doing things. So Zelda is kind of a midway point, and Link's Awakening it benefits from giving you enough to see without having it be overwhelming. And then everything starts to slowly make its own sense. Because every time you get a new item, you're like, okay, this was something I saw an hour ago or 2 hours ago. Or, and most dungeons are self-contained. So you don't have to go back into dungeons or anything like that. So that's a benefit. Most of this is just overworld traversal. But then you realize, okay, all this crappy swimming I've had to do forever is now alleviated because of the Zora thing. Hooray! Now I can swim and fucking cold ass water and get to the next thing. So getting to the dungeons is half an hour, in between shit. But you can have fun with things. You can fish for a little while, try to get that stupid bottle from the bottom of the sea, or just get those lunkers if you want, or do the trading sequence and get a boomerang, or get something else, little things like that. It's enough of intrigue to give you things to do, but the style is pure Zelda, and it doesn't overwhelm you. It doesn't try to, because it was made back in an era where you couldn't really be overwhelmed. It wasn't trying to it was basically trying to take Link to the Past and put it on a smaller platform. Now that we have this, we have something like Echoes of Wisdom. And Echoes of Wisdom is going to be different because that is going to be a more creative experience. That is going to be a solid sort of new feel. But knowing that it's going to look exactly like Link's Awakening is a little bit refreshing. Also, the fact that you can play as Zelda for the first time in 30 years? Yeah, I think 30 years is going to help. A Zelda game where you play as Zelda, imagine that. But as far as the story of Link's Awakening, the Ballad of the Windfish, waking up the Windfish, doing the things, it's there. I don't think anybody's ever going into a Zelda game for the lore. I've been of the opinion that I don't think they tried to make Zelda an interconnected franchise until people started bitching to them about it. So they made the Hyrule Historia and then ended up kind of forcing themselves to make the story make sense because everything was going to be, here's a new version of Zelda. Let's just do it. You know, we'll set it super fucking long in the future. Fucking deal with it. You know, rather than this happened in this timeline to do this thing. No, but the benefit with this is it is the same Link from Link to the Past. It's one of the few times it's a direct sequel, like Ocarina and Majora. But really, it's Link. You know, he's a dork. He's a child. He's an elf humanish looking kid who has a bunch of fucking items. Go to do dungeons. It's kind of like Castlevania. Whenever I talk about those, what's the story? Who the fuck cares? It's the same setup, except it's not Ganon this time. It's some weird shadow beings. The thing with Link's Awakening is they were able to not force Ganon and the Triforce and the whatever, so they made up different shit. And I kind of like that for a change of pace. What they go for doesn't always translate because they don't really raise the stakes too much. Because it's a Zelda game. They're not expecting you to have this Ocarina of Time adventure, and even Ocarina of Time story is fairly fucking basic, but because of the advancements in 3D, they're able to do a more cinematic sort of feel to it. In this game, they leave it very basic and bland, like a Castlevania or Mega Man game. You're not there for that. But what story there is, they're basically saying you beat some bosses, they start telling you that you're living in a dream. You're living in a dream, you don't know why, but these bosses are telling you, you stopped us from fighting, and you stopped us from ruling this place, and whatever. And then you realize that everything you've been experiencing is a dream. And you'll wake up if you wake up the Windfish. And the end result of that is just some weird shadowy amalgamation of stuff that does like a series of bosses that you fought before, like Moldorms and Wizrobes and Ganon. Fuck that Ganon spot. I couldn't hit him to save my life. Anyway, I'll stop complaining. And then you know, a couple other forms, and then it's done. And speaking of Moldorm, they make it super easy in this game. They realize that Moldorm in Link to the Past is a dick, so they make him less of a dick. But they defang the bosses. The bosses are not difficult at all, and I don't know, because Zelda is not meant for harder bosses. You know, especially later on where it's just find their weakness and go. You know, you hit them with their thing and then you hit them with their sword usually. It's mostly trial and error of which item to use, and sometimes it's the dungeon item, sometimes it's the bombs, sometimes it's the whatever, you know. But you do have some cool ideas at play, even if it's fairly basic, like the dude who's a face in the floor, or like a genie who you run into the wall and then you throw into the wall, you know, shit like that. It's not the hardest bosses in the world. They're not as like spectacular as even Link to the Past, where you had Aghanim, and as basic as Aghanim was, it's like he's throwing just light balls and lightning at you, or Vitreous, these fucking Vitreous and Arius, all these eyeball things. This is a clown in a lamp, right? Or a mini boss that just very small. They're not very big. And even Moldor mostly just looks like a moldy cheeseburger, right? He doesn't look all that threatening. So you kind of take Zelda with a pinch of salt and be like, all right, accept it for what it is. The dungeons are the draw. The bosses are just the cherry on top, because they're not meant to kill you. If you get killed by a boss, it's mostly late game shit. But they'll give you stuff like you have to search for seashells to get some special items, or you can get the red or blue mail if you want, red, like more power, or you want more defense. I want more defense personally because I'm kind of dumb at these kinds of games. But I never felt threatened until the very end. There was that boss in the Eagle Tower which could only be hit by certain times, and I hate those fucking bosses. I really do. Those are annoying. But by and large, you kind of figure out how a boss works pretty simply and pretty easily, and it makes sense. Everything feels intuitive. And if at the end of the day, what Link's Awakening does is it takes that old school, very intuitive design, gives you a new version of it, and now we're going to be blessed with echoes of wisdom. And for all accounts, it's going to be a little more creative than Link's Awakening was, because Link's Awakening had the constraints of simplicity. But the constraints of simplicity, again, are not terrible. If you can do it in a way, and I say this having played Final Fantasy IV, if you do an exciting enough game in the scope that you have without feeling really just stiff, because I think the first few Final Fantasy games were very stiff. 4, 5, and 6 were the ones where they were trying to finally break out of that. Zelda tried to be very open-ended in its early form, but then they kind of give you a little bit more, okay, you gotta go here to do the thing. You don't want to be on rails in a Zelda game. I am aware of that. But you need to be on rails enough that you can function. Because some people like to be able to be given absolute freedom. Some people like to be told, go here, dummy. I'm one of those dummies. So, as a dummy, did I enjoy Link's Awakening? Yes. To a point. I do think the weird backtracking and weirdness of 7 and 8 were a bit frustrating. And I did have to rage quit the final boss just because I couldn't fucking hit him for some fucking reason. But that's personal quibbles. As far as what I'd want a Zelda game to be going forward, I'd love to play more of these games. I'm glad we're getting another version of this, because I get why people love the 3D. But I grew up with the 2D style. I am ingrained in the 2D style. If you give us more of this, or Link Between Worlds, with the quality of life assurances that new consoles provide, I'm a happy guy. I would love to play stuff like Minish Cap and whatnot in a modern setting, because I never played those as a kid. Getting to re-experience things that I never played because I didn't have those consoles. That's what modern releases can do. And it's kind of a best of both worlds situation. Yes, I know that the 3D allows you to do more and is more popular and whatnot, but I still think that there's an audience for that 2D style, because that's what we grew up with. And, we're getting older, not gonna lie, but it's still, personal preference. You have the best of both worlds situation. But yeah, begrudgingly, I would recommend Link's Awakening to anybody, even if I had some quibbles. Because Zelda is one of those things where you have to have a happy medium. You have to have just enough to know what you're doing without being completely shoehorned into just following a production line or just following a tightrope. It does a good enough job, and you get 5 to 10 hours of fun. You get just enough side questy stuff to have fun without it feeling overwhelming. You're not stuck in a dungeon. You're not stuck doing a thing. You're only blocked off by certain things that the game forces on you for exploration purposes, and I find that good. But anyway, that will do it for me. I kind of went off the cuff this week because I've been very busy for the last few days. So apologies if I rambled a little bit. Normally I prep a little bit better, but hey, I've had my fun, and I did play this game a couple months ago, so it's well in my head. going forward, I will try to prep a little bit more often. But hey, it's up and down whenever I get a chance to do that. Anyway, as far as our schedule goes, next up will be Kemono Jihen. The Somnium Files Nirvana Initiative. I'm kind of reworking through that as we speak. Lee and I will talk about Sailor Moon Crystal. And that will be the 3rd anniversary of this podcast. I don't know how much longer I'm going to be doing this, but I still have a lot of games and anime I can go through. Shit, if I just do anime, I could probably do this for years. Persona 3 Reload, which is finishing on YouTube soon. Assassination Classroom. Bloodstained, Ritual of the Night, which I just found out has so much more stuff to it since the last time I got into it a couple years ago, so I really need to work on getting back into that. Konohana Kitan, which was a really solid anime, and then Metal Gear Solid 3, which I'll be doing a playthrough of later in the year. So, a little bit of a rambly episode today, but still good, I think, and I'll see you guys next time. Citizen Strife, signing off.